What's up, college football addicts? Today we are breaking down the FSU schedule, and I'm giving you the insight on how you should likely bet your money in our FSU preview presented by BetUS. Now, we've done this on our Florida State only channel. We did it with Richie, my co-host, and I want to maybe look at it from a little bit different perspective. I'm probably going to come up with the same number, but I want to maybe be a little bit less biased here as I sit in an FSU studio and certainly have some homerism, but want to maybe be a little bit more open to the idea that Florida State has a little bit different record than I predicted before, but still kind of give you my thoughts on the way that you should end up betting this. Now, Florida State's over-under is 9.5. You can bet that on BetUS right now. We'll talk about them a little bit more in a moment, but let's look at the schedule here. Florida State starts out the year in Dublin against Georgia Tech. Right now, they're a 12-point favorite on BetUS. That line has moved just a bit. It was up to about 13.5. Some people said they saw it at 14. I never saw it get up there. But line coming a little bit down. I don't think that's for any specific reason other than just money kind of coming in here or there. And I think that's an interesting little bit of movement. If you like the Noles to win this, I certainly think Florida State's the better team. I think you go and grab that because I wouldn't be surprised at all if that line starts to head back up the closer we get to kickoff. Georgia Tech, a good team, a team that did some good things last year. I've talked about this on our FSU channel. I think they're kind of a best of the rest team. I don't think they're in the upper echelon. I don't think they're at the bottom of the barrel, but I think they're the best of that kind of middle tier in the ACC. I think Florida State, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, maybe Louisville, all probably better than Georgia Tech. I think they're kind of in that range with maybe just above or below SMU. This is a game Florida State should absolutely go out and win. It's a game I do think they go out and get the win in, and a game that I think Florida State comes out maybe even going away. Like I'd bet the Noles in this minus 12. If it gets above that 14, that's probably where I'm going to have some pause. But I think the Noles end up getting this win in Dublin, start out the year, week 0, maybe a little revenge for how the last 8 months have gone for Florida State. They get a big win on national TV to start off the college football season. They play Boston College just that very next week, but a little bit of a caveat, they do get Boston College at home, and they get them on a Monday night. So you get a little bit of an extra travel time and extra recovery time coming back from playing in Dublin. And I think that'll help Florida State a lot. I also think BC is just kind of a really tough situation right now. Now, Castellanos and the Eagles last year played FSU to a 2-point game in a game where a lot of Florida State guys were sick, under the weather. Florida State let their foot off the gas a little bit, maybe had some chances to blow that game even more open than it was. But 31-10 at one point, it ended up being 31-29 as a final. I think Florida State's had to hear about that BC game all year, and I think that they'll be extra motivated on a Labor Day night in Doak Campbell Stadium. First game of the year on U.S. soil. I think Florida State gets the win here. Boston College just doesn't have enough, and I think the kind of fluky close game that you saw last year, you won't see again this year. I've seen this at like minus 23 in some places. I think Florida State wins and wins this big. Memphis comes to town. I think Florida State will be really well prepared. I think Mike Norvell will have his team very, very ready to play against his old squad. Ryan Satterfield, the coach there, I expect Memphis to be pretty good. I mean, they won 10 games last year. I just don't know if they're good enough to compete with the Florida State. I could see them keeping it closer than BC, but I do think that Florida State just has too many horses to lose this game. I think in the trenches you'll see a pretty big disparity. I love Florida State's offensive and defensive lines, and so I'm confident they start the year 3-0 with a win against Memphis, and then more of the same the next week against Cal. Cal, a program that had a good year last year, has a really good running back. I just don't know that it'll be enough. Traveling West Coast to East Coast, I think Florida State's defense against the run is extremely good. I think what trips up the Noles at times is really, really elite wide receivers and mobile quarterbacks. I think Florida State will key on that Cal running back and really shut things down, and I think the Noles win this one going away to get to 4-0. Start the year, first third of the year with all wins. Then you travel to SMU, and this is certainly one that gets a little bit tricky. I think early on, we haven't seen Florida State, we haven't seen SMU take the field yet, so it's easy to predict, late September now without having seen it. But I think this is one that Florida State should, again, get the win in. SMU had a really, really nice year last year. They've got a lot of returning production coming back. They've got a heck of a coach in Rhett Lashley, who I got to spend some time with up at ACC Kickoff. And I think they're a really good program kind of on the rise. And in fact, I even kind of mentioned them when I mentioned my tiers of the ACC. If you have Florida State and Clemson and Miami in that top tier, if you have NC State and Virginia Tech and Louisville in that next tier, I think your very next tier is like Georgia Tech and SMU, and maybe you slot another team or two in there. But I think these are teams that SMU is amongst those teams of kind of like the best of the rest. I'd take SMU against a lot of the ACC's teams that are in this conference this year. Certainly not tier 1, tier 2, but I think a tricky game. You have to go on the road to Dallas. You've been home for a month. BC, Memphis, Cal, and then leading up to the SMU game. You've been home for a long time. How does going on the road change your schedule up? It's not a traditional college town. It's a big city of Dallas. Stay out of trouble. Stay in when you're with the team. But I think a game that, again, Florida State, if they play well, they should come out and win. They've got way more talent. They're going to win in the trenches. And if they can stay healthy, I think they get to 5-0 against SMU. But this is maybe the toughest game on the schedule so far. That or Georgia Tech, maybe going on the road makes it slightly tougher. But SMU, a tough game. Florida State gets to 5-0, though. Clemson's the first big challenge on the schedule. And it's certainly a game that Florida State will never take lightly, but especially with DJ Uiagalelei playing his old team with the Tigers coming to town. It does feel, and we'll do one of these for Clemson eventually, but it does feel like Clemson and Florida State are kind of on opposite trajectories where one team is going high, one team's kind of going low. And Clemson has a chance to turn that around this year. They have a massive game starting out with Georgia to start. They have NC State a couple of weeks after that, and then they have Florida State here in week 5, where they've got a chance to come out and early in October kind of solidify, no, this is still our conference, right? You got us last year, you fluky game on the road in Clemson, South Carolina. You got the win in overtime, but this is still our conference. Until I see Clemson come out and play better against the Georgia, against an NC State, I have a tough time picking them this early. Now, I'm not saying that Florida State's an absolute lock for this win. I think it'll be a close spread. It would surprise me if Florida State's more than a touchdown favorite. I would expect them to be about a touchdown favorite this early, but I need to see it from Clemson before I can pick them. And they very well may be better. They very well may be improved. But until I see it on the field, I've got a tough time thinking that they can go into Doak Campbell Stadium and get a win here. Certainly is possible. They've gotten a lot of wins there over the last however many years. They won there in 16. They won there in 18. Had it not been for COVID, they would have won there in 20. They won there in 2022. They've been really good in Doak Campbell, right? When they won in 22, the quarterback of Florida State was the quarterback at Clemson. So there's a lot of great storylines in this one. I need to see Clemson do it before I can say that they are going to win this game. Now, they beat Georgia, they beat NC State, they played Georgia close, and they beat NC State. Florida State struggles and drops a game. I might flip my pick on this, but as of now, I think Florida State gets them. Close game. Florida State 6-0. And then at Duke, Friday night, that's a little bit weird. Certainly weird things happen on the road in conference, especially on a Thursday or Friday night. But I still think Florida State's got too much for Duke here. I won't even spend a lot of time on that one. No offense to any Duke listeners. But Florida State gets the win, gets to 7-0. It's tough to predict 7-0. It's tough to think that, man, yeah, they're not going to have anywhere where they bump their toe or they, screw up. Certainly possible. I think if you come out of this stretch at 6-1, nobody's going to be shocked by any means. I think 5-2 would probably be pretty disappointing. I think the only loss that Florida State fans would really be okay with, and not even okay with, but the only loss they'd really be open to is the Clemson one. If you lost SMU but beat Clemson the next week, that would certainly help kind of like take that bitter taste out of your mouth. But they really, they're going to be a favorite in the first 7 games. If they can find a way to win all 7 of them, they'll be in really good shape. A really tough stretch upcoming here for the Noles on the back half of the schedule, and we'll talk about some of that in just a moment. But before I go on, I do want to give a little bit of love to BetUS. The best thing about these previews is that if you love the prediction that I'm doing or you hate the prediction that I'm doing for this team, you can go to BetUS right now and wager on what you think is going to happen. You think I'm too high, you think I'm too low. Go put your money where your mouth is, like I am, over on the over or under on wins. BetUS has a 125% deposit bonus match up to $2,000 on your first 3 deposits. They have the best customer service in the game, and the website and mobile site are extremely easy to use. I appreciate BetUS for their support, and go lock in your bet right now for the Seminoles over under on wins. Late in October, Florida State travels down to Miami where they play the Hurricanes in a game that is close most of the time. I saw a stat this week that over 70% of the time, this rivalry has been separated by just 1 score either way. There have been games that should have been blowouts for both teams, and the rivalry kind of kept them close. Namely, last year when Florida State came in as a big favorite, Miami kind of limping toward the finish, certainly not having the year that they thought they would, and Florida State and Miami played to a 1-score game. I remember when Jameis was playing in 2013. That was a 1-score game at the half. Florida State kind of iced it at the end and certainly pulled away, but Miami, Florida State certainly keep the games closer than is expected at times. And this one should be no different. Brand new quarterback in Cam Ward, kind of rebuilt team through the portal with some really good recruiting classes as well. Florida State, Miami in this game, I will not be surprised at all if either team is a 3-point favorite. I would be surprised if it's more than 3 points for either team by the time we get there. Would probably mean one team has dropped a few games that maybe wasn't expected. I think Florida State going into this game should be at worst 6-1, and I think Miami coming into this game at worst case should be 6-1. We'll do a Miami preview here soon, but until I see Miami put it together on the field, it's really hard to pick them. It's kind of like the Clemson thing. They could be very talented this year. Miami could win a lot of games this year. But in that head-to-head matchup, I need to see Mario Cristobal go out and get some big wins, beat some teams the way they're supposed to beat teams, and then I think I'll take Miami a little bit more seriously. How does Miami fare in that Week 1 matchup against Florida? How do they look when they have to play Virginia Tech? How do they look just the week before when they have to go on the road and play Louisville, another tough place to play? After those 3 games and making sure that Miami doesn't stub their toe anywhere else, I think we'll have a much better idea of what Miami looks like. After Florida State's first 7 games, what do they do against Clemson? How do they look on the road at SMU? How do they look in Dublin with everybody watching? We'll know a lot more about these teams, and the pick at that time may flip. But as of now, I need to see Miami come out and beat Florida State. I worry about Miami's secondary. I think they have more holes there than Florida State has anywhere else on their roster. Obviously, the addition of Cam Ward, Damian Martinez makes them a very potent team potentially. I think Florida State has the edge on both sides of the line of scrimmage, but just slight, razor thin. Miami maybe on defensive line has a tad more, but I like Florida State's offensive line better, so I think it's pretty neutral there at best. For the Canes, I think Florida State's quarterback situation is something they absolutely love. I mean, Miami fans like where they're at with Cam Ward too, and they absolutely should. Miami has maybe more of a big hitter with Damian Martinez, but maybe not as much of a stable depth. Florida State's probably 5 deep in their running back room. I also think that when you look at Miami's big-time weapons at wide receiver, Florida State has probably the best secondary in the conference. This is a very close matchup. Miami will, as for all the jokes, Miami will have more fans there than Florida State unless they've just given up on the season, but they will have more fans there than Florida State. It won't be like 90-10. I mean, usually those crowds are like 70-30, 65-35, but not as much of a home field advantage as normally would have. So I think this is one that Florida State edges out. It's tough to predict a game this early, but I'll take the Noles in this one. I think the game day coaching edge goes to Norvell, and so I'd lean FSU here, but this is going to be, I think it's the toughest game on FSU's schedule. I've got them winning it, but this game certainly could go either way. UNC the next week at home, win or loss to Miami. I think the Noles come out and get a win there. I think Mac Brown's kind of towards the end, kind of in the twilight. I don't necessarily know that they can come into Tallahassee and get a win. Mike Brown has never beaten Florida State in his coaching career. I think that streak is extended. At Notre Dame, I said Miami was the toughest game on the schedule. I think Notre Dame is probably the second toughest game on the schedule. This is one I think the Noles end up dropping. I think weather is a big issue here. I think Riley Leonard will have a better year this year, staying a little more healthy. I don't think he's necessarily the savior, but I think Notre Dame's defense is really, really good. I think it'll be tough for Florida State to score. That's projecting, what middle of November is going to look like here in August. But I think that I could see a situation where Florida State can't score enough and Notre Dame edges them out. Cold weather, Riley Leonard being good. I think Freeman's a great coach. And Florida State drops this one at Notre Dame. Certainly not a game that they absolutely will lose. I think it'll be close. I'd be surprised if, again, Notre Dame's more than about a touchdown favorite, even at home. I think these two will be two pretty close to, if not top 10 teams. I think it'll be a massive, massive matchup. It could get game day that day. But Notre Dame gets the win. Florida State gets their first loss of the year. I think at this point, they'd be 9-1. Charleston Southern, easy win to finish out. Your group of 5 teams that you play, and then you have UF, the last game of the year. I think UF is going to be improved this year. I just think that the murderer's row that they have to play before they get to the Florida State game. We'll do a UF preview here in a little bit, but the murderer's row they have to play before they get to the FSU game is just going to be too much. Florida State gets the win at home against their rival. I think it's close again. I mean, I think Florida State probably wins by 10 or so, just like they did last year. 2-score win, but I don't see Florida State winning by 28 or anything. I think Florida always fights. They always kind of keep it close, and I don't think Florida State, is going to necessarily blow them out. We are predicting something that's happening in late November here in middle of August, but I think that Florida State's the better team. They're about a touchdown or more to anywhere between 7 and 11-point favorite right now on different betting sites, especially BetUS is where you should be betting. But I think that Florida State is just the better team here. They certainly have the better coach. I think their quarterback, they have the higher ceiling. Florida State's better in the trenches. For all those reasons, I think the Noles get the win. They get to 11-1. Here's my takeaway. That's the same record I had on the FSU channel. My big takeaway, though, is that this is not a guaranteed 11-1. The SMU game is very tricky. Georgia Tech, if you don't take that seriously, could certainly be a loss. Miami could be a loss. Clemson could be a loss. I mean, if you don't take Florida seriously, that could be a loss. We talked about Duke on the road on a Friday night in conference. Those are all games that are losable. Now, there are a lot of games on the schedule that Florida State has no business losing, like BC and Memphis and Cal, North Carolina, Charleston Southern, of course. So there's some pretty extreme auto wins. But when it really comes down to it, the schedule comes down to 4 games for me. The schedule comes down to Notre Dame, Miami, Clemson, and either SMU or Florida, right? Tough to know exactly which one, but if you've got those 4 games in mind, you really should win everything else. Man, if you can go 2-2 in those 4 games, you hit the over, right? So the over-under is 9.5 for the Noles, and I'd have a hard time seeing them not go 2-2 in those games. Maybe you split with Miami and Florida. Maybe you split with Clemson and Notre Dame. And if so, you're going 10-2, right? And based on who you're losing to, maybe that's a trip to Charlotte for the ACC championship. Maybe that's a playoff berth either way. Not sure at this point. A lot to go there. But I like the over. If you're going to bet on BetUS, again, use the link in my description. And I like the over here. So that's where I'm placing my bet. That's what I'm putting my money on. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Let me know if you sign up for a BetUS account. We appreciate them for their support. And again, thank you guys for watching College Football Addiction.